Elijah Hawkins pressed the barrel of his rifle against his own chin and closed his eyes. 3 years of silence. 3 years of waking up in an empty bed, reaching for a woman who would never be there again. His finger trembled on the trigger. But then he heard a woman's scream cutting through the autumn wind. And something inside him, something he thought had died with his wife and daughter, forced him to lower the gun and run toward that sound. He had no idea that saving her would cost him everything he had left. If you want to know what happened next, subscribe to our channel and follow this story to the very end. Drop a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Elijah Hawkins had not spoken to another human being in 11 days. He counted them the way a prisoner counts the marks on his cell wall. Not because the number mattered, but because counting gave him something to do besides remember. 11 days since he'd ridden into Miller's Creek for supplies. 11 days since old Sam Whitfield had tried to make conversation, and Eli had answered with nothing but a nod and coins on the counter. 11 days of silence, and he preferred it that way. The cabin creaked around him as he sat at the rough-hewn table, a cup of coffee growing cold in his hands. October had come to the Colorado Territory with teeth, and the wind outside howled like something wounded. But Eli didn't hear it. He was looking at the photograph propped against the wall, the only decoration in the entire cabin. Rebecca smiled back at him from that photograph. Little Emma sat on her lap, all curls and missing teeth and joy. 3 years, Eli said to the empty room. His voice sounded strange to his own ears, rusty from disuse. 3 years today. He remembered the exact moment. Rebecca's hand going limp in his. Emma's small body so hot with fever he could feel it through the blanket. The doctor saying words that didn't make sense. Nothing more I can do. The sickness took too many this year. I'm sorry, Mr. Hawkins. Sorry. As if that word meant anything. Eli pushed back from the table and walked to the corner where his rifle leaned against the wall. He'd been a schoolteacher in Boston before. He'd taught children to read Shakespeare and do arithmetic. He'd worn clean shirts and attended church socials and believed that life made sense. Now he was just a man with a rifle and a cabin and too many memories. He picked up the weapon, checked that it was loaded, walked outside into the bitter wind. The land stretched out before him endless and empty and utterly indifferent to his pain. 3 years ago he'd thought coming west would help. New place, new start. That's what people said. Wasn't it? But grief had followed him across every mile of prairie and mountain patient as a shadow. Eli raised the rifle. His hands were steady. That surprised him. He'd expected them to shake. I'm tired, Rebecca, he whispered to the wind. I'm so goddamn tired. The barrel was cold against the underside of his chin. He closed his eyes and saw Emma's face, heard her laugh, felt her small arms around his neck. Daddy, tell me a story. Daddy, carry me. Daddy, I love you to the moon and back. His finger found the trigger, and then he heard the scream. Eli's eyes snapped open. For a moment, he thought he'd imagined it, his mind playing tricks, giving him an excuse to delay what he'd come out here to do. But then it came again, high and desperate, cutting through the wind from somewhere to the east. A woman's scream. The rifle came down from his chin without conscious thought. His legs were moving before his mind caught up, carrying him toward the sound with a speed that surprised him. 3 years of barely existing, and suddenly his body remembered what it meant to run. The scream came again, closer now, and with it, rough male laughter. Eli crested a small rise and saw them. 5 men on horseback had cornered someone against a rocky outcrop. No, not someone. A woman. A native woman in a deerskin dress, her back pressed against the stone, a knife in her hand. She held it like someone who knew how to use it, but 5 against 1 wasn't odds anyone could beat. Come on now, darlin', one of the men called out. He was big-bearded, swaying in his saddle with the loose confidence of the drunk. "We just want to have some fun. Ain't no one gonna miss a squaw anyway." "Yeah," another laughed. "Your people killed my brother at Little Bighorn. Way I see it, you owe us." The woman didn't respond. Her dark eyes moved from man to man, calculating, waiting. Eli could see her chest heaving, could see the tremor in her knife hand, but her face showed nothing but cold fury. "Last chance," the bearded man said, drawing his pistol. "Drop that knife or I'll put a hole in you and we'll have our fun anyway." Eli didn't think. He simply raised his rifle and fired. The shot went wide intentionally. It tore past the bearded man's ear close enough that he could feel the heat, and suddenly all 5 men were wheeling their horses, their attention snapped away from their prey. "The hell?" The bearded man squinted toward the rise where Eli stood. "Who's there?" Eli walked toward them, his rifle steady, already working the lever action to chamber another round. His heart was pounding. When was the last time his heart had pounded? But his hands were rock solid. "Right away," he said. His voice came out low and rough, a sound he barely recognized. "Now." The bearded man laughed, but there was uncertainty in it. "You see what we got here, boys? Some dirt farmer thinks he's gonna play hero for a savage. I said right away." Eli stopped 20 feet from them, his rifle aimed at the bearded man's chest. "I won't ask again. There's 5 of us, and one of you friend." One of the other men, younger, meaner looking, had his hand on his pistol. "Math ain't in your favor." "Maybe not." Eli's voice was flat dead, the voice of a man with nothing left to lose. "But I guarantee I'll kill at least 2 of you before I go down. Question is which 2 wants to die over a woman they don't even know." Something in his tone made the men hesitate. The bearded one studied Eli's face, and whatever he saw there made him shift uncomfortably in his saddle. "You're that hermit," he said slowly. "Lives up in the hills. Folks in town say you're touched in the head." "Folks in town say a lot of things." Eli didn't lower the rifle. "Are you gonna ride, or are we gonna find out how crazy I really am?" For a long moment, no one moved. The wind howled around them, carrying the smell of pine and coming snow. The native woman stayed pressed against the rocks, her knife still raised, her eyes flickering between Eli and the men who had attacked her. Then the bearded man spat on the ground. "She ain't worth dying over," he said. "Come on, boys, we'll find our fun somewhere else." "I'm not done with her," the young one protested. "I said, come on, Billy." The bearded man's voice went hard. "Unless you want to explain to your mama why you got shot over some Indian trash." Billy glared at Eli with pure hatred, but he followed when the others turned their horses. One by one they rode away, disappearing over the rise toward town. Eli kept his rifle raised until they were gone. Then slowly he lowered it. His hands started shaking. "You're bleeding." The woman's voice made Eli jump. He'd almost forgotten she was there. He looked down and saw dark stains spreading across his side just above his hip. One of them must have gotten a shot off during the confrontation. He didn't even remember hearing it. "Huh," he said, which wasn't much of a response, but it was all he could manage. The adrenaline was draining away now, leaving him hollow and strange. "Let me see." The woman stepped away from the rocks, her knife now sheathed at her waist. She moved toward him with surprising confidence for someone who'd just been cornered by 5 armed men. "It's fine," Eli said. "Just a graze." "It's not a graze. I can tell by how you're standing." She was in front of him now, close enough that he could see the details of her face, high cheekbones, a small scar above her left eyebrow, dark eyes that seemed to look straight through him. "Take off your coat." "Ma'am, I appreciate the concern, but—" "I said take off your coat." Her voice cracked like a whip. "You just saved my life. I'm not going to let you bleed out in the dirt because you're too proud to accept help." Eli stared at her. Something in her tone reminded him of Rebecca, that same refusal to accept nonsense, that same stubborn determination. It caught him off guard so completely that he found himself obeying, shrugging off his coat with a wince. The woman pulled up his shirt and sucked in a breath. "This is bad," she said. "The bullet is still inside." "I've had worse." "No, you haven't." She looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "You need a doctor." "Nearest doctor is in Miller's Creek, 20 miles. Eli felt the world starting to tilt slightly. Loss of blood, probably. "I'll be fine. You'll be dead in an hour." The woman seemed to make a decision. She stepped back and put her fingers to her lips, letting out a sharp whistle that echoed across the hills. "What are you—" "My horse isn't far." She was already moving, gathering Eli's dropped coat, checking the horizon for any sign of the men returning. "I'm taking you to my village. Our healer can remove the bullet." Eli shook his head, which was a mistake the world spun dangerously. "I can't go to your village." "Why not?" "Because your people will kill me." The woman paused. For the first time, something like emotion flickered across her face, a sad smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Maybe," she said. "But if I leave you here, you die for certain. At least with my people you have a chance." A horse appeared over the rise, trotting toward them in response to her whistle. "Besides, you saved my life. That means something even to warriors who hate white men." "Why?" The question came out slurred. Eli was having trouble focusing. "Why does it mean something?" The woman helped him toward the horse, her arm surprisingly strong around his waist. "Because in my culture, when someone saves your life, your spirit becomes tied to theirs. You owe them a debt that can only be repaid by saving them in return." She lifted him onto the horse with effort, then climbed up behind him. "My name is Winona, and I always pay my debts." Eli wanted to argue. He wanted to tell her that he didn't need saving, that he'd been ready to end everything just minutes before, that maybe dying out here would be simpler than whatever she was dragging him into. But the darkness was coming warm and heavy, and the last thing he heard before it took him was Winona's voice close to his ear. "Stay awake. Stay awake, white man. You don't get to die yet." He dreamed of Rebecca. She was standing in the doorway of their house in Boston, sunlight streaming around her, Emma on her hip. She was saying something, but Eli couldn't hear the words. He tried to move toward her, tried to reach out, but his legs wouldn't work. Rebecca smiled. She always had the most beautiful smile. Then the sunlight changed, became firelight, and Rebecca was gone. Eli woke to pain. Not the dull, distant ache of grief that had been his constant companion for 3 years. This was sharp, immediate, centered in his side, where something was digging into his flesh. "Hold him down," a voice said, an old woman's voice speaking in a language he didn't understand. Strong hands pressed his shoulders into whatever he was lying on. Eli's eyes flew open, and for a moment all he could see was chaos, faces hovering above him. Firelight dancing across unfamiliar walls, the glint of metal in an old woman's hands. "What?" He tried to sit up and felt the hands push him back down. "Don't move." That was Winona's voice somewhere near his head. "She's removing the bullet. If you move, she might hit something important." Eli forced himself to look at the woman working on his wound. She was ancient, her face a map of wrinkles, her hands gnarled but steady. She met his eyes briefly and said something in Lakota. "She says you're lucky," Winona translated. "The bullet missed everything vital. You'll live." "That's—" Eli gritted his teeth as the old woman's probe found metal. "That's good, I guess. Hold still." The next few minutes were some of the worst of Eli's life, which was saying something. He'd buried a wife and child, lost everything he'd ever loved, spent 3 years trying to forget how to feel. But none of that compared to the sensation of a bullet being extracted from his flesh by a grandmother with zero interest in his comfort. When it was finally over, when the old woman had packed the wound with herbs and wrapped it in clean cloth, Eli lay on the furs, staring up at the smoke hole in the ceiling and trying to remember how to breathe. "Where am I?" he asked eventually. "My village." Winona appeared in his field of vision, kneeling beside him. In the firelight, she looked different than she had on the prairie, softer somehow, though her eyes were still guarded. "We're 2 hours north of where you found me." "Your village." Eli tried to process that. "How long have I been out?" "Since yesterday. The blood loss was worse than I thought." She handed him a cup filled with something that smelled like pine and honey. "Drink this. It will help with the pain." Eli hesitated. "How do I know you're not poisoning me? If I wanted you dead, I would have left you on the prairie." Winona's voice was flat. "Drink." He drank. The liquid was bitter beneath the honey, but warmth spread through his body almost immediately, dulling the sharp edges of the pain. "Thank you," he said. The words felt strange in his mouth. How long had it been since he'd thanked anyone for anything? Winona didn't respond. She took the cup from his hands and stood moving toward the entrance of the teepee. "You should sleep," she said without looking back. "Tomorrow, my chief will want to speak with you. You'll need your strength." "About what?" Eli's voice came out slurred. Whatever was in that drink was working fast. "About whether to let you live." Winona pushed aside the flap and stepped out into the night. "Sleep well, white man." Morning came with pain and the smell of cooking meat. Eli opened his eyes to find himself alone in the teepee. The fire had burned down to coals, but someone had left water and strips of dried meat within reach of where he lay. His side throbbed with every breath, but the wound felt cleaner, less angry than it had the night before. Carefully, he pushed himself into a sitting position. The movement made his head spin, but he forced himself to breathe through it. 3 years of self-neglect had left him weaker than he should have been. A man in his prime shouldn't feel this fragile. "You're awake." Eli looked up to find Winona entering the teepee. She was dressed differently today, still in deerskin, but with more elaborate beadwork, and her long black hair was braided and decorated with small feathers. She looked, he realized, like she was prepared for something important. "The chief wants to see you," she said. "Can you walk?" "I can try." Getting to his feet was an ordeal. Eli had to grip one of the tippy poles for support, and even then his vision grayed at the edges. But he stayed upright, which he counted as a victory. "Here." Winona handed him a walking stick, a sturdy branch worn smooth by use. "My uncle used this after he was wounded in a hunt. Lean on it." "Your uncle?" "He died." Her voice was matter-of-fact. "The wound went bad, but that won't happen to you. My grandmother's medicine is strong." "Your grandmother? The woman who—" "Removed your bullet, yes. She's the best healer in 3 villages." Winona held the tippy flap open. "Come. The chief doesn't like to wait." Eli stepped outside and stopped. The village spread out before him, dozens of teepees arranged in a loose circle, smoke rising from cooking fires, horses grazing on the outskirts. People moved everywhere. Women tending fires, children running between the shelters, men checking weapons and talking in small groups. And every single one of them had stopped to stare at him. "Don't make eye contact with the young warriors," Winona murmured, falling into step beside him. "Some of them want to kill you regardless of what the chief decides. Don't give them an excuse." "Good advice." Eli kept his eyes forward, leaning heavily on the walking stick. "Any other wisdom? Don't lie. My chief has been negotiating with white men for 20 years. He knows when they're lying." She paused. "And don't mention the men who attacked me. Not yet." "Why not?" "Because if my cousin finds out what they tried to do, he'll ride out and kill them. And then your soldiers will come and kill us in return." Winona's voice was carefully neutral, but Eli could hear the tension beneath. "We're trying to avoid a war, not start one." They were approaching the largest teepee, now set slightly apart from the others. Two warriors stood guard at the entrance, their faces painted, their weapons visible. They stared at Eli with undisguised hostility. "Winona," one of them said sharply. Something in Lakota followed. Winona responded in the same language. Her chin raised, her voice carrying a note of authority that surprised Eli. The guards exchanged glances, then stepped aside. "What did you tell them?" Eli asked as she led him inside. "That you're under my protection. That harming you would dishonor me." She didn't look at him. Whether that actually protects you remains to be seen. The chief's tipi was larger than the one Eli had woken up in, but simpler than he'd expected. A central fire burned low, casting flickering shadows across the walls. Furs and blankets lined the edges of the space, and at the far end, an old man sat cross-legged, watching them enter with eyes that missed nothing. Chief Mapia. Eli recognized authority when he saw it. He'd known schoolmasters and politicians and military officers in his former life, men who commanded attention simply by existing. This man had that same presence multiplied by decades of leading his people through impossible circumstances. "Sit," Mapia said. His English was accented but clear. Eli lowered himself to the ground across the fire from the chief, trying not to wince as the movement pulled at his wound. Winona settled beside him close enough that her shoulder nearly touched his. For a long moment, no one spoke. Mapia studied Eli's face with the patient intensity of someone used to making decisions about life and death. "My granddaughter tells me you saved her from 5 white men," the chief said finally. "Granddaughter." Eli filed that information away. "I did." "Why?" The question caught Eli off guard. "Why?" "Yes. Why did you help her?" Mapia's eyes never wavered. "She is Lakota. You are white. Your people and mine have been killing each other for generations. Why would you risk your life for someone your own kind calls enemy?" Eli considered lying. Considered making up some noble reason, some story about believing in justice or equality, or the inherent worth of all human life. But Winona had told him not to lie, and something in the chief's gaze suggested he would know immediately if Eli tried. "Honestly," Eli said, "I wasn't planning to survive the day anyway." The admission hung in the air between them. Winona went very still beside him. "Explain," Mapia said. Eli took a breath. The words that came out were ones he hadn't spoken to anyone in 3 years. "I had a wife, Rebecca, and a daughter, Emma. She was 4 years old." His voice sounded distant to his own ears, like he was hearing someone else speak. 3 years ago, there was a fever in Boston. It took them both. He had to stop, had to swallow against the sudden tightness in his throat. It took everything that mattered. The fire crackled. Somewhere outside, a child laughed. "I came west to forget," Eli continued. "But you can't outrun grief. It follows you. It lives in every sunrise, every empty chair, every quiet moment when you expect to hear someone's voice, and there's nothing but silence." He met Mapia's eyes. "When I heard your granddaughter scream, I was standing in a field with a rifle under my chin. I'd decided it was time to stop running. And yet you are here," Mapia said softly. "Alive. I heard her scream, and I thought—" Eli paused, trying to put into words something he didn't fully understand himself. "I thought that if I was going to die anyway, I might as well do something useful first. Something that mattered." Did saving her matter? I don't know. Eli's honesty surprised him. But it felt like the first real thing I'd done in 3 years. Mapia was silent for a long moment. Then he turned to Winona and spoke in Lakota, a rapid exchange that Eli couldn't follow. Winona responded, her voice growing heated at one point, before settling back into calm. Finally, the chief turned back to Eli. "My granddaughter says you fought those men alone, that you were wounded protecting her. That you showed no fear, even when outnumbered. His expression remained unreadable. She also says, you refused to come to our village, that you believed we would kill you. It seemed like a reasonable assumption. And yet, you came anyway. I didn't have much choice. I was unconscious. Something flickered across Mapia's face. Amusement, maybe, or respect. You speak the truth even when a lie would serve you better. That is rare among your people. With respect, Chief, I'm not really my people anymore. Eli gestured at himself, the worn clothes, the unkempt beard, the hollowness that he knew showed in his face. I've been living alone in a cabin for 3 years, talking to no one, caring about nothing. I'm barely people at all. Grief does that. Mapia's voice was gentler now. It takes pieces of us, until we're not sure what's left. He paused. I lost my wife to the same sickness that took your family. I lost 2 sons to your army's bullets. I understand what it means to keep breathing when everything in you wants to stop. Eli didn't know what to say. He hadn't expected to find common ground with a Lakota chief in the middle of enemy territory. You will stay here, Mapia announced. It wasn't a request. Until you are healed. After that, we will discuss what happens next. Stay here. Eli shook his head. Chief, with respect, I don't think... You are under Winona's protection. You saved her life, and now she has saved yours. In our way, that creates a bond that cannot be ignored. Mapia rose, signaling that the conversation was over. Whether that bond becomes friendship or something else remains to be seen. But you will not leave until your wound is healed, and we have had time to determine what kind of man you truly are. And if your warriors disagree... Eli thought of the hostility he'd seen in their eyes, the barely contained violence. Mapia's expression hardened. Then they will answer to me. And trust me, white man, none of them want that. Hey. Winona led him back to her family's teepee in silence. Eli's mind was reeling, trying to process everything that had happened. 24 hours ago, he'd been ready to end his life. Now, he was a guest prisoner in a Lakota village, bound by obligations he didn't fully understand, to a woman he'd known for less than a day. You didn't tell me he was your grandfather, Eli said as they walked. You didn't ask. Winona held the tippy flap open for him. Besides, it wouldn't have changed anything. The chief makes decisions for the good of the village, not for his family. Would he really have let them kill me? If he believed you were a threat. Winona's eyes met his steadily. Yes, without hesitation. She helped him lower himself onto the furs where he'd spent the night. But you weren't a threat. You were just... broken. The word stung more than Eli expected. Thanks for that. I don't mean it as an insult. Winona settled across the fire from him, her posture careful and contained. I know what broken looks like. I see it every time I look in a mirror. Eli studied her face, the guarded eyes, the tension in her jaw, the way she held herself like someone waiting for the next blow. The men who attacked you, he said slowly. That wasn't random, was it? It doesn't matter. It does to me. Winona was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was flat, stripped of emotion. My husband was a warrior named Running Bear. 2 winters ago, the army raided our camp while most of our men were hunting. Running Bear rode back to defend us. He killed 3 soldiers before they shot him off his horse. She paused. The soldiers who survived remember my face. They've been looking for me ever since. Those men today were probably paid to find me, or maybe they just recognized me and wanted revenge. She shrugged, but Eli could see the pain beneath the gesture. Either way, it's my problem, not yours. I made it my problem when I took a bullet for you. You took a bullet because you wanted to die anyway. Winona's voice was sharp. Don't pretend it was heroism. The words hit Eli like a slap. He opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. She wasn't wrong. Maybe it started that way, he admitted. But when I was lying in that field bleeding out, I didn't want to die anymore. I don't know why, but something changed. Winona stared at him across the fire, her expression unreadable. Maybe dying is easy, she said finally. It's living that's hard. Maybe you finally figured that out. Is that wisdom or experience? Both. She rose and moved toward the entrance. Get some rest. Tomorrow we start figuring out how to keep you alive long enough to actually heal. Winona! She paused at the entrance. Thank you, Eli said, for not leaving me on that prairie. She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer than he'd heard it. Don't thank me yet, she said. You haven't met my cousin Redhawk. He's going to want to kill you more than anyone. She pushed through the teepee flap and was gone, leaving Eli alone with the fire and his thoughts and the strange, unexpected sensation of wanting to see tomorrow. 3 days passed before Eli could walk without the stick. On the morning of the 4th day, he woke to find Winona already gone and the teepee filled with the smell of something cooking over the fire. His side still ached, but it was a healing ache now, the kind that reminded him he was alive, rather than suggesting he might not be for long. He pushed himself upright and found a bowl of stew waiting beside the fire. Venison from the smell of it, with wild onions and something earthy he couldn't identify. His stomach growled loud enough to echo off the tippy walls. You're awake. Eli looked up to find an old woman entering Winona's grandmother, the one who had dug the bullet out of him. In the daylight streaming through the smoke hole, she looked even more ancient than he remembered her face, a landscape of wrinkles, her eyes sharp as flint. Ma'am, he said, unsure of the proper greeting. The old woman snorted and said something in Lakota that sounded distinctly unimpressed. She crossed to him and, without asking permission, pulled up his shirt to examine the wound. Healing, she announced in accented English. You are lucky. Bullet was close to killing you. So I've been told. My granddaughter says you wanted to die. The old woman's eyes met his, and Eli felt suddenly exposed. She says you had the rifle under your chin when you heard her scream. Eli didn't know what to say. The truth seemed inadequate, and lies felt impossible under that penetrating gaze. I wasn't thinking clearly, he managed. No, you were thinking very clearly. The old woman released his shirt and sat back on her heels. You had decided death was better than living with your pain. That is not confusion. That is a choice. It was a mistake. Was it? She tilted her head, studying him like he was a particularly interesting insect. My granddaughter lost her husband. She has thought about making the same choice. Many times. The words hit Eli like cold water. He thought of Winona's guarded eyes, the careful way she held herself, the flatness in her voice when she spoke of Running Bear. She told me he died defending the village, Eli said quietly. He died because your people cannot leave us in peace. The old woman's voice held no anger, only exhaustion. He died because soldiers wanted revenge for battles they started. He died in Winona's arms with her name on his lips. She paused. And every day since she wakes up and chooses to keep breathing. Even when it hurts. Even when she doesn't want to. Why are you telling me this? Because you saved her life. And now you are bound to her whether you like it or not. The old woman rose, her joints creaking. In our way, that means something. It means her pain is now your pain. Her enemies are your enemies. She moved toward the entrance. And her cousin, who loved Running Bear like a brother, is now your enemy too. Redhawk. He will come for you today. He has been patient because the chief commanded it. But his patience is ending. The old woman looked back at him. Do not fight him. You cannot win. But do not run either. Running will only make him hunt you harder. Then what do I do? Survive. She pushed through the tippy flap. That is all any of us can do. Eli sat in the silence she left behind, his appetite suddenly gone. The stew grew cold while he stared at the fire, thinking about a woman who woke up every day choosing to keep breathing. He understood that choice better than anyone. The tippy flap rustled, and Eli's hand moved instinctively toward the knife that Winona had left beside his bedding. But it was only her carrying a bundle of what looked like clothing. "You're awake," she said, echoing her grandmother. "Good. You need to eat and get dressed. My grandfather wants to see you." "Your grandmother was just here." "I know. I saw her leaving." Winona set the bundle down beside him. "What did she say?" "That Red Hawk is coming for me today." Winona's expression flickered too fast for Eli to read. "She shouldn't have told you that." "Why not? Seems like useful information." "Because now you'll be afraid, and fear will make you stupid." She crouched beside him, her dark eyes searching his face. "Red Hawk is not like the men who attacked me. He's not drunk or careless. He's the best warrior in our village, and he's been waiting 3 days for permission to kill you." "And the chief gave that permission?" "No, but Red Hawk doesn't always wait for permission." Winona pushed the bundle toward him. "These are my husband's clothes. They should fit you. Your own are ruined." Eli looked at the bundle, soft deerskin, carefully maintained, obviously precious. "I can't wear your husband's clothes." "Why not?" "Because he died protecting you from people like me. It feels wrong." Something shifted in Winona's face. For the first time since he'd met her, she looked uncertain. "Running Bear would have liked you," she said quietly. "He was always collecting strays. Wounded animals, lost children, anyone who needed help." Her voice caught slightly. "He would have seen your pain and tried to fix it. That was who he was. You must miss him. Every moment of every day." Winona's eyes met his, and Eli saw the grief there, raw and familiar. But missing him doesn't bring him back, and refusing to move forward doesn't honor his memory. She stood. "Wear the clothes. Consider it a gift from him to you, one broken person to another." She left before Eli could respond. He sat there for a long moment looking at the bundle. Then slowly he began to dress. The clothes fit better than he'd expected, soft against his skin, warm without being heavy. As he pulled the shirt over his head, he caught a faint scent clinging to the leather. Pine and smoke, and something else. Something that must have been Running Bear himself. "I'll try to deserve them," Eli said to the empty tippy. "I don't know if I can, but I'll try." The sun was high when Eli emerged from the tippy, and the village was alive with activity. Women tended cooking fires and worked on hides. Children ran between the tippies, their laughter bright against the autumn air. Men gathered in small groups, talking in low voices, and watching Eli with expressions that ranged from curiosity to open hostility. He found Winona waiting for him near the central fire, speaking with a young warrior whose face was painted with red and black stripes. The warrior was gesturing emphatically, his voice rising with what sounded like anger, and Winona was shaking her head. Eli approached slowly, giving them time to notice him. When they did, the warrior's expression shifted to something cold and predatory. "So, this is him," the warrior said in heavily accented English. "The white man who thinks he can live among us." "Red Hawk." Winona's voice carried a warning. "The chief said—" "I know what the chief said." Red Hawk didn't take his eyes off Eli. "I also know that my cousin Running Bear died because of men like this one. Men who take what doesn't belong to them. Men who destroy everything they touch." Eli met his gaze steadily. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Your sorrow means nothing." Red Hawk stepped closer, close enough that Eli could smell the war paint on his skin. "Running Bear was my brother in everything but blood. We hunted together, fought together, bled together. And now he is gone, and you stand here wearing his clothes. Winona gave them to me. Winona doesn't understand." Red Hawk's voice dropped, became something almost intimate in its hatred. She thinks because you saved her life, you are different from the others. But I know the truth. You are all the same. You smile and make promises, and then you take everything we have. I'm not here to take anything. No. Then why are you here? Red Hawk's hand moved to the knife at his belt. You have a cabin, don't you? A home among your own kind. Why would you stay in a village full of people who hate you? It was a good question. Eli had been asking himself the same thing for 3 days. Because I don't have anywhere else to go, he said finally. And because your chief offered me hospitality. Where I come from, that means something. Where you come from, hospitality is a word you use before you steal someone's land. Red Hawk drew his knife, and the village seemed to go quiet around them. I think it's time we tested what kind of man you really are. Red Hawk, no. Winona stepped between them, her back to Eli. He's still wounded. It wouldn't be fair fight. Since when has fairness mattered to his people? Red Hawk tried to step around her, but Winona moved with him, blocking his path. Get out of my way, cousin. No. I said move. And I said no. Winona's voice was steady, but Eli could see the tension in her shoulders. You want to fight someone? Fight me. I'm the one who brought him here. I'm the one who put him under my protection. Red Hawk's expression flickered surprise, confusion, something that might have been hurt. You would defend him over your own family. I would defend my honor over your pride. Winona didn't back down. You want to kill him to prove you're still a warrior? That's not justice. That's murder. And Running Bear would be ashamed of you. The words hit Red Hawk like a physical blow. For a moment, something cracked in his carefully maintained mask of hatred, grief, maybe, or shame. Then it closed again, harder than before. Running Bear is dead, he said flatly. He doesn't get to be ashamed of anything anymore. Then I'll be ashamed for him. Winona's voice softened slightly. Red Hawk, I loved Running Bear too. I held him while he died. I heard him call your name, asking you to protect me. She reached out and touched her cousin's arm. Is this how you protect me, by killing a wounded man who saved my life? Red Hawk stared at her, his jaw working. Around them, the village waited in breathless silence. He saved you from white men, Red Hawk said finally. That doesn't make him good. It just makes him different kind of white man. Maybe that's enough. Winona's hand tightened on his arm. Maybe different is all we can hope for right now. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Red Hawk sheathed his knife with a sharp, violent motion. This isn't over, he said to Eli, looking past Winona as if she wasn't there. The chief may have forbidden me from killing you, but chiefs don't live forever, and neither do guests who overstay their welcome. He turned and walked away, his stride stiff with suppressed rage. The village slowly returned to life around them. Conversations resuming, children's laughter starting up again. Winona didn't turn around. She stood with her back to Eli, her shoulders rising and falling with deep breaths. Thank you, Eli said quietly. Don't thank me. Her voice was rough. Red Hawk is right about one thing. This isn't over. He'll find another way to get to you, and next time I might not be there to stop him. Why did you stop him? Now she turned. Her eyes were bright, but Eli couldn't tell if it was anger or tears. Because I don't want any more death, she said. Because I'm tired of burying people I care about. Because... She stopped herself, shook her head. Because you're not what I expected. What did you expect? A white man, arrogant, ignorant, convinced that his ways are better than ours. She studied his face. Instead, I got a broken schoolteacher who puts rifles under his chin and jumps in front of bullets for strangers. Is that better or worse? I don't know yet. Winona turned away and started walking toward the edge of the village. Come on, my grandfather is waiting, and we've already kept him too long. Eli followed her through the village, trying to ignore the stares that followed them. He found himself watching Winona as she walked the confident way she moved, the slight tension in her shoulders that never quite relaxed. Can I ask you something? He said. You can ask. I might not answer. Your grandmother said you've thought about making the same choice I almost made, in the field with the rifle. Winona's stride didn't falter, but he saw her back stiffen. My grandmother talks too much. Is it true? She didn't answer for several steps. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. After Running Bear died, I walked out to the cliff overlooking the river, the one where we used to sit and watch the sunset. She paused. I stood on the edge for a long time. The water was so far down and I was so tired. It would have been easy to just let go. What stopped you? My grandmother found me. She didn't say anything. She just sat down beside me and started singing. An old song one my mother used to sing to me when I was small. Winona's voice caught. We sat there until the sun went down, and then she took my hand and led me home. Eli thought about his own dark moments, the nights when the emptiness felt endless, the mornings when getting out of bed seemed impossible. He thought about the rifle under his chin, the peace he'd expected to find, the scream that had shattered everything. I'm glad she found you, he said. So am I. Most days. Winona glanced back at him. What about you? What would have happened if you hadn't heard me scream? Eli considered lying, considered softening the truth to make it easier to hear. But Winona had been honest with him, and she deserved the same. I would have pulled the trigger, he said, without hesitation, without regret. And now? Now. He took a breath, surprised by his own answer. Now I'm not sure. Something changed when I saw those men hurting you. Something woke up that I thought was dead. Maybe it wasn't dead. Maybe it was just sleeping. Maybe. Eli walked beside her in silence for a moment. Your grandmother said that saving your life bound us together, that your pain is now my pain. That's the old way, the traditional belief. Do you believe it? Winona stopped walking. They had reached the edge of the village where the teepees gave way to open grassland stretching toward distant mountains. She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. I believe that when someone saves your life, you owe them something. Not just gratitude, something deeper. She met his eyes. I believe that you and I are connected now, whether we like it or not. And I believe that connection will either save us both or destroy us both. That's a lot of belief. Yes. Her mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile, but close. It is. They stood there for a moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then Winona turned away. Come on. My grandfather is in the council teepee. We've kept him waiting long enough. Chief Mahpia sat alone in the council teepee, his eyes closed, his breathing slow and steady. He looked smaller somehow than he had during their first meeting. Older, more tired, like a man carrying a weight too heavy for his shoulders. He didn't open his eyes when they entered, but his voice was clear and strong. Sit. They sat across the fire from him, Winona on Eli's right, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. The fire burned low between them, casting dancing shadows across the teepee walls. I heard what happened with Red Hawk. Mahpia said, his eyes still closed. I heard what you said to him, granddaughter, and what you didn't say. Grandfather. You defended this white man against your own cousin, against your dead husband's closest friend. Mahpia's eyes opened now, fixed on Winona, with an intensity that made Eli uncomfortable. Why? Winona lifted her chin. Because Red Hawk was wrong. Because killing a wounded guest would dishonor our people. Because you feel something for him. The words fell like stones into still water. Winona went rigid beside Eli, her breath catching. Grandfather, that's not... Don't lie to me, child. I've known you since before you could walk. I know what it looks like when your heart is waking up. Mahpia's gaze shifted to Eli. And you look at her the same way. You probably don't even realize it yet, but I do. Eli opened his mouth to deny it, but the words wouldn't come. Because somewhere beneath his grief, beneath the numbness that had protected him for 3 years, something was stirring. something that felt like hope. "It doesn't matter what I feel," he said instead. "In a few weeks, I'll be healed enough to leave. I'll go back to my cabin, and you'll never see me again." "Will you?" Mapia leaned forward. "Will you really go back to that empty cabin and that empty life, or will you find another rifle to put under your chin?" The question cut deep. Eli couldn't answer. "I thought so." Mapia sat back. "You came here dying, white man. Not from the bullet wound that was just flesh. You came here with your spirit bleeding out, looking for a place to finally stop breathing." He paused. But something happened. Something changed. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." Mapia's voice was gentle now, almost kind. "You saved my granddaughter's life, and in doing so, you saved your own. That's the way it works. That's the truth. The old stories try to teach us that we cannot heal alone. We need someone else. We need connection." Eli thought about the moment he'd heard Winona's scream. The way something had snapped inside him, breaking through the fog of despair. The way his body had moved before his mind could catch up, choosing life over death without conscious thought. "Even if that's true," he said slowly, "it doesn't change anything. Your people hate me. Red Hawk wants to kill me. And your granddaughter—" He stopped, unable to finish. "My granddaughter has been walking through the world like a ghost since her husband died," Mapia said. "She breathes, she eats, she does what needs to be done. But she hasn't been alive. Not really." He looked at Winona, his expression softening. "Until 3 days ago. Until she dragged a dying white man into our village and demanded that we save him." Winona's voice was barely a whisper. "Grandfather, please. You stood up to Red Hawk for him. You gave him your husband's clothes. You've spent every free moment checking on him, making sure he's healing." Mapia smiled, but there was sadness in it. "You're coming back to life, granddaughter. I can see it. The question is whether you're brave enough to accept it." "It's not about bravery," Winona's voice cracked. "It's about loyalty. About honoring Running Bear's memory. About— Running Bear loved you more than anything in this world." Mapia interrupted gently. "Do you think he would want you to spend the rest of your life alone? Do you think he would want you to push away happiness because you feel guilty for surviving?" Tears were streaming down Winona's face, now silent and steady. Eli felt his own eyes burning and had to look away. "I can't," Winona whispered. "I can't forget him. I can't." "No one is asking you to forget him." Mapia reached across the fire and took his granddaughter's hand. "Loving someone new doesn't erase the love you had. The heart is not a cup that can only hold so much. It's a river, it can carry many waters and still keep flowing." The teepee fell silent, except for the crackle of the fire and Winona's quiet crying. Eli sat frozen, unsure what to do. What to say? He had come here expecting to discuss his place in the village, the threat from Red Hawk, the tension between their peoples. He had not expected this. "I don't know what's happening," he said finally, his voice rough. "I don't know what I feel, or what I'm supposed to do. 3 days ago, I was ready to die. Now I'm sitting in a Lakota village wearing a dead man's clothes, and everything I thought I knew about myself is falling apart." "Good." Mapia released Winona's hand and turned his attention back to Eli. "Falling apart is the first step to being rebuilt. You cannot become who you need to be while you're still holding on to who you were." "Who do I need to be?" "That's not for me to say. That's for you to discover." Mapia rose slowly, his joints protesting. "But I will tell you this. The path ahead is dangerous. Red Hawk will not give up easily. The soldiers at the fort are growing restless, and there are others men who want war on both sides, who will see you as either a threat or an opportunity. What do you want me to do? Stay, heal, learn our ways." Mapia moved toward the entrance. "And when the time comes to make a choice, and it will come, choose with your heart, not your fear." He left without another word, leaving Eli and Winona alone in the flickering firelight. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Winona wiped her face with the back of her hand, not looking at him. Eli stared at the fire, trying to make sense of everything he'd heard. "I'm sorry," Winona said finally. "My grandfather shouldn't have said those things. It wasn't fair to you." Was it true? The question hung in the air between them. Winona's hands twisted in her lap, and when she finally looked up at him, her eyes were red-rimmed but clear. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I don't know what I feel. You're not what I expected. You're broken and kind and stubborn and brave, and you saved my life when it would have been easier to let me die." "It wouldn't have been easier. For most white men, it would have been." She shook her head. "That's what I can't understand. Why you? Why did you have to be the one who heard me scream? Maybe it was supposed to happen." Eli was surprised by his own words. "Maybe your people's beliefs about connection aren't just stories. Maybe some things are meant to be." "Do you believe that?" He thought about it, really thought for the first time in years. "I believe that I was standing in a field ready to die, and then I heard your scream, and something in me chose life. I believe that you dragged me into this village when you could have left me bleeding in the dirt. I believe that your grandfather sees something in both of us that we can't see ourselves." He met her eyes. "And I believe that whatever happens next, I don't want to go back to being the man I was before, the one who lived alone and talked to no one and counted the days until he could find the courage to end it all." Winona stared at him, her expression shifting through emotions he couldn't name. Then slowly she reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were warm against his calloused from years of work, strong and gentle at the same time. It was the first time anyone had touched him with kindness in 3 years, and the sensation was almost overwhelming. "I don't know where this goes," she said quietly. "I don't know if we're making a terrible mistake. But my grandfather is right about one thing. I've been dead inside since Running Bear died. And for the first time in 2 years, I feel something other than grief." "What do you feel?" She squeezed his hand. "Hope. Terrifying, impossible hope." Eli felt something break open in his chest, the wall he'd built around his heart cracking apart piece by piece. It hurt. God, it hurt. But beneath the pain was something else. Something that felt like the first warm day after a long winter. "I feel it too," he said. "And it scares the hell out of me." "Good." Winona almost smiled. "If you weren't scared, I'd think you were crazy." "Maybe I am crazy. Maybe we both are. Maybe." She released his hand and stood. "But crazy or not, we still have to figure out how to keep you alive. Red Hawk isn't going to stop just because you and I are having a moment." Eli stood too, wincing as his wound protested. "What do we do?" "We give him something else to focus on. Something bigger than his hatred for you." Winona moved toward the entrance. "There's a supply wagon coming from Fort Morrison in 3 days. The army is bringing goods to trade with the tribes who've agreed to move to the reservations. And your tribe hasn't agreed." "No, we're one of the last holdouts." Winona's voice hardened. "The soldiers have been pressuring my grandfather for months, threatening him with force if he doesn't comply." "What does this have to do with Red Hawk?" "Red Hawk wants to raid the wagon, kill the soldiers, take the supplies, send a message that we won't be pushed around." She looked back at him. "My grandfather has forbidden it, but Red Hawk has been gathering warriors who agree with him. If he can't kill you, he'll find another outlet for his rage. And if he raids that wagon, the army will come for your whole village." "Yes." Winona's eyes met his. "Unless someone stops him." Eli understood what she was asking. It was insane dangerous beyond measure. But as he looked at her standing in the teepee entrance, firelight playing across her face, he knew he would do it. Because somewhere in the past 3 days, he had stopped wanting to die. And now, he had something to live for. "Tell me everything about this wagon," he said. "And about Red Hawk's plans." Winona's expression softened with something that might have been pride. "I knew there was a reason I saved your life," she said. "Come on, we have a lot of work to do." If you or someone you know is having a difficult time, free support is available. Find resources. The next 2 days passed in a blur of whispered conversations and careful planning. Winona had been right about Red Hawk. He wasn't just angry, he was organized. Through careful observation and quiet questions to warriors she trusted, she learned that he had gathered nearly a dozen men who shared his fury. They met at night, away from the village, speaking of blood and vengeance and the glory of striking back against the white invaders. "He's convinced them that my grandfather is too weak to lead," Winona told Eli on the second night, sitting beside him near the edge of the village where they wouldn't be overheard. "He says that submission to the army is the same as death, that we should fight while we still have the strength." "He's not entirely wrong." Eli kept his voice low. "I've seen what happens to tribes that move to the reservations. The promises the government makes don't last. The supplies run out. The hunting grounds shrink to nothing." Winona looked at him sharply. "You're defending him now." "I'm saying I understand why he feels the way he does. That doesn't mean I think he's right." Eli shifted, his wound still tender but healing fast. "Raiding that wagon won't save your people. It'll give the army the excuse they've been looking for to wipe you out." "I know that. My grandfather knows that. But Red Hawk sees only his pain and his rage." Winona's voice carried a weariness that made her sound decades older. "He loved Running Bear like a brother. When my husband died, something in Red Hawk died too. He's been looking for a way to make that death mean something ever since. And killing soldiers will give it meaning. In his mind, yes." She pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. "He thinks that if he can hurt them badly enough, they'll leave us alone. He doesn't understand that it will only bring more of them." Eli was quiet for a moment, thinking about the path that had brought him here. A week ago, he'd been alone in a cabin, counting down the days until he found the courage to end his suffering. Now, he was planning to stop a war alongside a woman whose people had every reason to hate him. "What's our plan?" he asked. "Red Hawk is going to move tomorrow night. He's planning to ambush the wagon at the river crossing where the soldiers will be vulnerable." Winona's jaw tightened. "We need to get there first. Warn the soldiers. Convince them to change their route. And Red Hawk. If the soldiers aren't where he expects them, he'll have to call off the raid. He's reckless, but he's not stupid. He won't attack a prepared enemy." She paused. "The problem is getting to the crossing without being seen. Red Hawk has scouts watching the trails." "Then we don't use the trails." Winona raised an eyebrow. "You know another way. I've been living in these hills for 3 years. I know paths that nobody uses anymore, old hunting trails, abandoned mining routes." Eli met her eyes. "I can get us to the crossing before Red Hawk's men even know we've left." "That's a long ride. Your wound?" "My wound is fine." It wasn't entirely true, but it was close enough. "Winona, if we don't do this, your whole village dies. Red Hawk gets his war and your grandfather's hope for peace dies with everyone else." She stared at him for a long moment, something shifting behind her eyes. "Why do you care so much? A week ago you wanted to die. Now you're risking your life for people who've given you nothing but suspicion and hostility." It was a fair question. Eli had been asking himself the same thing. "Because I was dead before I met you," he said slowly. "Not physically, but in every way that mattered. I was walking through the world like a ghost, going through the motions of living without actually being alive." He paused, searching for the right words. "And then I heard you scream and something woke up. Something I thought I'd buried with my wife and daughter." What was it? Purpose. Connection. The feeling that maybe my life could mean something again. He looked out at the darkening sky. "Your grandfather was right. I can't heal alone. None of us can. We need each other." Winona was silent for so long that Eli thought she wasn't going to respond. Then quietly she said, "Running Bear used to say something like that. He said that the strongest warrior isn't the one who fights alone, it's the one who knows when to let others fight beside him." He sounds like he was a wise man. He was. He was also stubborn and proud and terrible at cooking. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. He would burn water if you let him try to boil it. It was the first time Eli had heard her speak of her husband with anything other than grief. The smile faded quickly, but something in her posture relaxed slightly. "I miss him," she said. "I'll always miss him. But my grandmother was right. I've been holding on to my grief like a shield, using it to keep everyone away." She turned to face Eli. "I don't want to do that anymore. I want to feel something besides loss." "What do you want to feel?" She held his gaze. "I want to feel alive again, the way I did before the world started falling apart." Eli reached out and took her hand. It had become easier to touch her over the past 2 days, natural, almost like they'd known each other far longer than a week. "Then let's keep each other alive. Let's stop this raid and show Red Hawk that there's another way." Winona's fingers tightened around his. "And if we can't, if Red Hawk won't listen, then we do whatever we have to do." Eli's voice was steady. "But we try talking first. We owe him that much." "We don't owe him anything." "Maybe not, but you loved his cousin, and he loved Running Bear. That has to count for something." Winona looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You're a strange man, Elijah Hawkins. A week ago you were ready to put a rifle under your chin. Now you're talking about owing compassion to someone who wants you dead. People change." "Do they?" "I did." He squeezed her hand. "So can he. We just have to give him the chance." They left before dawn, slipping out of the village, while the sky was still gray with pre-morning light. Winona had procured 2 horses from her grandfather's herd. "He knows we're going," she said when Eli asked. "He can't openly support us without undermining his authority, but he won't stop us either." The ride was hard, even taking the hidden paths Eli knew. His wound protested every jolt and bounce, but he gritted his teeth and pushed through. Winona rode beside him, her eyes constantly scanning the horizon for any sign of Red Hawk's scouts. They reached the river crossing by mid-afternoon. The water ran fast here, swollen by recent rains, and the banks were muddy and treacherous. It was a perfect place for an ambush. The soldiers would have to slow their wagon to navigate the crossing, leaving them vulnerable to attack from the surrounding hills. "Now we wait," Winona said, dismounting near a cluster of rocks that provided cover from prying eyes. "The wagon should arrive before sunset." Eli climbed down from his horse, wincing as his wound pulled. "And if Red Hawk gets here first, then we have a problem." They settled in to wait, the hours crawling by with agonizing slowness. Eli found himself watching Winona as she sat with her back against a boulder, her eyes fixed on the distant horizon. She had changed since their first meeting, or maybe he was just seeing her differently now. The hard edges were still there, but beneath them he could see the woman she'd been before grief had hollowed her out. "Tell me about Boston," she said suddenly. The question caught Eli off guard. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. What it was like. What your life was like before." She pulled her gaze from the horizon to meet his eyes. "I've never been east of the Missouri River. I want to understand where you came from." So Eli talked. He told her about the narrow streets and the brick buildings, the harbor full of ships from around the world, the schoolhouse where he'd taught children to read and write. He told her about Rebecca, how they'd met at a church social, how she'd laughed at his jokes even when they weren't funny, how she'd made their small house feel like the center of the universe. And he told her about Emma, the way she'd run to meet him when he came home from work, the stories she'd demanded every night before bed, the gap-toothed smile that could light up even his darkest days. "She would have been 7 this year," he said, his voice rough. "She wanted to be a teacher like me. She used to line up her dolls and pretend to give them lessons." Winona was quiet for a moment. Then she reached out and took his hand. "Tell me how she laughed," she said. Eli's throat tightened. "What, her laugh? What did it sound like? No one had ever asked him that. Not the doctors, not the neighbors who offered empty condolences, not the people he'd left behind when he fled west. No one had asked about the small, beautiful details that made Emma who she was. "It was bright," he said finally. "Like bells ringing. She laughed with her whole body. She'd throw her head back and her eyes would squeeze shut, and you couldn't help but laugh with her, even if you didn't know what was funny. She sounds wonderful." She was. Eli's eyes burned, but for the first time in 3 years, the tears felt like release instead of drowning. "She was the best thing I ever did. And when she died, I thought that part of me died too. The part that knew how to love. It didn't die." Winona's voice was soft. "It just went to sleep, waiting for something to wake it up." Eli looked at their joined hands, his scarred and calloused, hers strong and capable. Two broken people holding on to each other in the middle of nowhere, waiting for a confrontation that could kill them both. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For asking about her laugh, for wanting to know who she was, not just that she died." Winona squeezed his hand. "The people we lose deserve to be remembered as more than their deaths. Running Bear was brave and kind and terrible at cooking. Your Emma laughed like bells and wanted to be a teacher. That's who they were. That's who they'll always be." Before Eli could respond, the sound of hooves reached them from the east. He tensed his hand, moving instinctively toward the rifle Winona had brought for him. "Wait," Winona said, her eyes narrowing. "That's not a wagon. That's horses. Many of them." She was right. Over the ridge came a group of riders, not soldiers but warriors. Red Hawk led them, his war paint, fresh, his expression fierce with purpose. "He moved early," Eli breathed. "He must have learned about the wagon's schedule, decided not to wait for nightfall." Winona's face had gone pale. "We have to stop him. Now." She was on her feet before Eli could argue, stepping out from behind the rocks and into plain view. Red Hawk's scouts spotted her immediately, and within seconds, the entire group had changed direction, riding straight toward them. Eli stood beside Winona, his rifle ready, but pointed at the ground. Fighting would be suicide. There were at least a dozen warriors, and even if he could take down a few, they'd overwhelm him in seconds. Their only chance was to talk. Red Hawk reached them first, his horse skidding to a halt in a spray of dirt. His eyes went from Winona to Eli and back again, and his expression darkened with fury. "You!" he snarled at Eli. "I should have known you'd try to interfere." "Red Hawk, listen to me." Winona stepped forward, putting herself between the two men. "You can't do this. The wagon is full of supplies meant to bribe our people into submission. Blankets and food in exchange for our land, our freedom, our souls." Red Hawk's voice rose with each word. "I will not let them buy us like cattle. And what happens after you kill the soldiers? What happens when the army sends 100 more, 1,000 more?" Winona's voice cracked with desperation. "They will burn our village. They will kill everyone, men, women, children. Is that what Running Bear would have wanted?" The mention of her husband made Red Hawk flinch, but the rage in his eyes didn't dim. "Running Bear is dead because of them. Because we were too weak to fight back. I won't make the same mistake. Running Bear is dead because he chose to protect his people, not to destroy them." Winona's voice dropped, became something soft and terrible. "He died in my arms, Red Hawk. He called your name. He made me promise to keep the village safe." "Safe?" Red Hawk laughed, but there was no humor in it. "There is no safety. There is only survival or death, and I choose to die fighting rather than live on my knees. That's your choice to make, not theirs." Winona gestured to the warriors behind him. "Have you asked them if they want to die? Have you asked their wives and children if they're willing to be slaughtered so you can have your vengeance?" Several of the warriors shifted uncomfortably. Eli saw doubt flickering across a few faces. These weren't fanatics. They were desperate men looking for hope. "She's right." Eli stepped forward, ignoring Winona's warning look. I know you hate me. I know you think I'm the enemy, but I'm not your enemy today. Your enemies are the men who will come after you attack that wagon, the generals who will use your raid as an excuse to finish what they started. You expect me to take advice from a white man? Red Hawk's hand moved to his tomahawk. You who wear my cousin's clothes? Who puts his hands on Running Bear's widow? I expect you to listen to reason. Eli kept his voice calm, even though his heart was pounding. You want to hurt them. You want to make them pay. Then live, survive, raise children who remember what was taken from them. Build something they can never destroy. Pretty words from someone who has lost nothing. I lost everything. The words came out harder than Eli intended. I lost my wife. I lost my daughter. I lost every reason I had to keep breathing. So don't tell me I don't understand loss. Red Hawk studied him with narrowed eyes. And yet here you are, still breathing. Because someone gave me a reason to try again. Eli glanced at Winona. Someone who understood my pain because she carries her own. The silence stretched between them, heavy with tension. Behind Red Hawk, the warriors waited, their weapons ready, but their faces uncertain. This wasn't what they'd signed up for, a philosophical debate at the river crossing. They'd come for blood and glory. Let them go, Winona said softly, stepping toward her cousin. Let them ride home to their families. And you come back to the village with us. We'll find another way. Red Hawk's jaw tightened. There is no other way. There's always another way. She reached out and touched his arm gently, the way you'd touch a wounded animal. Running Bear believed that. My grandfather believes it. I believe it. And if you're wrong, then we die together as a people. Not scattered and broken, but whole. Her voice broke slightly. Please, Red Hawk, don't make me bury another person I love. Something cracked in Red Hawk's expression. For a moment, Eli saw past the war paint and the rage to the grieving man beneath a man who had lost his closest friend and didn't know how to carry that weight. He was supposed to lead us, Red Hawk whispered. Running Bear. He was going to be chief someday. He was going to make everything better. I know. And they took him from us. They took him, and they felt nothing. Tears were streaming down Red Hawk's face, now cutting tracks through the paint. How am I supposed to live with that? How am I supposed to just accept it? You're not. Winona's own tears fell freely. You're supposed to rage and grieve and scream at the sky. You're supposed to feel like your heart has been ripped out. But then you're supposed to keep going, because that's what he would have wanted. Red Hawk closed his eyes. His hand fell away from his tomahawk. Behind him, the warriors began to lower their weapons, the tension draining from their bodies. Whatever spell Red Hawk had woven with his promises of glory and vengeance was breaking. I don't know how to stop being angry, Red Hawk said, his voice barely audible. You don't have to stop. Eli stepped closer. You just have to aim it at something that matters. Build something. Protect something. Don't let them win by becoming what they expect you to be. Red Hawk opened his eyes and looked at Eli. Really looked for the first time without hatred clouding his vision. You really believe that? I have to. It's the only thing keeping me alive. The sound of wheels and horses reached them from the west. The wagon. It was close now, maybe 10 minutes away. Red Hawk turned to face his warriors. Go home, he said, his voice rough but steady. Tell no one what happened here today. But, one of the younger men started. I said go home. Red Hawk's voice cracked like a whip. This isn't your fight anymore. It never should have been. One by one, the warriors turned their horses and rode away. Within minutes, only Red Hawk remained standing beside his horse, looking lost in a way that Eli recognized all too well. What will you tell my grandfather? Red Hawk asked Winona. The truth, that you came to your senses before it was too late. She walked to him and took his hand. Come home, cousin. We'll figure out the rest together. Red Hawk looked at their joined hands, then at Eli. Something complicated passed across his face. I still don't trust you, he said to Eli. I still think you're going to hurt her eventually. That's what your people do. Maybe, Eli admitted, but I'm going to try like hell not to. Red Hawk mounted his horse. He sat there for a moment, looking down at them, his expression unreadable. Then slowly he nodded. If you do hurt her, he said, I will kill you, and no amount of pretty speeches will stop me. Fair enough. Red Hawk rode away without another word, disappearing over the ridge in the direction of the village. Eli let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Well, that went better than expected. Winona laughed a real laugh, surprised out of her by relief and exhaustion. You have a gift for understatement. Rebecca used to say the same thing. The name came out easily this time, without the stabbing pain that usually accompanied it. She said I could describe a house fire as a bit warm. She sounds like she had to put up with a lot. She did, she really did. Eli smiled, and it felt strange on his face, unfamiliar, like a muscle he'd forgotten he had. Thank you. For what? For talking him down. For being brave when I know you were terrified. Winona looked at him, her dark eyes soft in the fading light. I was terrified. I thought he was going to kill you right there in front of me. Would that have been so bad? A week ago, you didn't even know I existed. A week ago, I didn't know a lot of things. She stepped closer to him, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her breath. Things change. The wagon rumbled past in the distance, the soldiers unaware of how close they'd come to dying. Eli barely noticed. All he could see was Winona's face, the setting sun painting her features in gold and amber. What happens now? He asked. Now we go home. She took his hand. And we figure out what this is. What we are. And your people. Red Hawk the army. One problem at a time. She smiled, and it transformed her face, made her look young and hopeful, in a way he'd never seen before. We saved a lot of lives today. Let's take a moment to appreciate that before we start worrying about tomorrow. She was right. For the first time in 3 years, Eli allowed himself to simply exist in the present, not dwelling on the past, not dreading the future. Just here now, holding hands with a woman who had dragged him back from the edge of oblivion. Okay, he said. One problem at a time. They mounted their horses and turned toward the village, riding side by side as the sun sank below the horizon. The ride back to the village took longer than the journey out. Eli's wound had reopened during the confrontation with Red Hawk, and every step his horse took sent fresh waves of pain through his side. He said nothing about it, but Winona noticed anyway. She always seemed to notice. You're bleeding again, she said, pulling her horse alongside his. I'm fine. You're a terrible liar. She reached over and pressed her hand against his side, and when she pulled it back, her palm was dark with blood. We need to stop. We're almost there. I can make it. Eli. Her voice carried that sharp edge he'd come to recognize as her refusing to take no for an answer. You nearly died once this week. I'm not going to watch you do it again because you're too stubborn to rest. He wanted to argue, but the world was starting to swim at the edges. Maybe a short stop. They dismounted near a small stream, and Winona made him sit while she examined the wound. The stitches her grandmother had put in had torn, and blood was seeping steadily through the bandage. This is bad, she muttered, pulling supplies from her saddlebag. You need to rest for at least a week. No riding, no heroics, no standing between angry warriors and their targets. I'll try to schedule my heroics more carefully next time. This isn't funny. Her hands were gentle as she cleaned the wound, but her voice was hard. You could have died today. You almost did die, and for what? To save people who don't even want you here. You want me here. The words stopped her. She looked up at him, her dark eyes unreadable in the fading light. Yes, she said finally. I do, and that terrifies me. Why? Because the last man I wanted here is buried on the hill overlooking the river. Because everyone I love gets taken from me. Her voice cracked. Because I can't survive losing someone else. Eli reached out and cupped her face in his hand. Her skin was warm beneath his palm, and he could feel her trembling. I'm not going anywhere, he said. You can't promise that. No one can. No, but I can promise to try. I can promise to fight like hell to stay alive, to stay here, to be whatever you need me to be. He met her eyes. Isn't that enough? Winona stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, two wounded people, testing the boundaries of something new. But then her hand came up to grip his shirt, pulling him closer, and Eli felt something break open inside him. Not pain this time, but release. 3 years of grief and loneliness and numbness, cracking apart like ice in spring. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. That was... Eli started. Unexpected, Winona finished. I know. I didn't plan it. Are you sorry? She considered the question with the seriousness she brought to everything. No, she said finally. I'm not sorry. I'm scared and confused, and I have no idea what happens next. But I'm not sorry. Good. Eli smiled, and it felt easier than it had in years. Because I'm not sorry either. They sat there by the stream as the stars came out, not talking, just existing together. Eli's wound still throbbed, but the pain seemed distant now, less important than the warmth of Winona's hand in his, the sound of her breathing beside him. We should go, she said eventually. My grandfather will be worried. Your grandfather knew exactly what he was doing when he sent us out here together. Probably. She stood and offered him her hand. That doesn't mean we should make him wait all night. The village was quiet when they arrived. Most of the fires burned down to embers. But Mahpia was waiting for them outside his tipi, his face unreadable in the darkness. Red Hawk returned an hour ago, the chief said as they approached. He told me what happened at the river. Eli tensed, but Winona's hand tightened on his arm. All of it, she asked. Enough. Mahpia's eyes moved from his granddaughter to Eli and back again. He said the white man talked him down, used words instead of weapons. We both did, grandfather. That's not how Red Hawk tells it. The chief stepped closer to Eli, studying his face with that penetrating gaze. He says you stood in front of him knowing he could kill you. He says you showed no fear. I was terrified, Eli admitted. I just didn't let it stop me. That is the definition of courage. Mahpia's expression softened slightly. You saved many lives today, my people's lives. That debt will not be forgotten. I wasn't keeping score. No, I don't believe you were. The chief glanced at his granddaughter, and something passed between them that Eli couldn't interpret. You should rest, both of you. Tomorrow we will speak of what comes next. He disappeared into his teepee, leaving Eli and Winona alone in the darkness. What did he mean by that? Eli asked. What comes next? I don't know. Winona's voice was tired, but peaceful. But for once I'm not afraid to find out. She led him to her family's teepee and settled him onto the furs where he'd been sleeping since he arrived. Her grandmother appeared from somewhere, tisking at his reopened wound and setting to work with fresh bandages and pungent herbs. Foolish man, the old woman muttered as she worked. Running around like a young warrior when you should be resting. He saved many lives, grandmother, Winona said. He nearly lost his own. But there was no real anger in her voice, and when she finished bandaging the wound, she patted Eli's shoulder almost gently. Sleep now. You earned it. Eli drifted off with Winona's hand in his, the smell of healing herbs in his nose, and for the first time since Rebecca died, he didn't dream of death. The morning brought complications. Eli woke to the sound of raised voices outside the tipi. Winona was already gone, her sleeping furs empty and cold. He pushed himself upright, wincing at the pull of his wound, and stumbled outside to find the village in chaos. People were running between the teepees, gathering children and belongings. Warriors were checking weapons and painting their faces. And at the center of it all stood Winona, arguing furiously with Red Hawk. "What's happening?" Eli demanded, pushing through the crowd. Winona turned to him, her face pale. "Soldiers. A patrol from Fort Morrison. They're less than an hour away. They're coming here. They're coming for us." Red Hawk's voice was flat empty of the rage that had filled it yesterday. "Someone told them about the planned raid. They think we're preparing for war." Eli's blood went cold. "But we stopped the raid. They don't know that. All they know is what their spy told them, that warriors were gathering, that an attack was planned." Red Hawk met Eli's eyes. "They're coming to make an example of us before we can strike first." "How many soldiers?" 30, maybe more." Winona's hand found his gripping tight. "Eli, they have a cannon. If they decide to attack, they'll destroy everything." Eli's mind raced through the possibilities. 30 soldiers with a cannon against a village of families. It wouldn't be a battle, it would be a massacre. The warriors could fight, but they'd be slaughtered, and the women and children would follow. "We need to evacuate," he said. "Get everyone out, head for the mountains." "There's no time." Mapia appeared beside them, his face grave. "And even if there was running, would only confirm their suspicions. They would hunt us down. Then what do we do?" The chief looked at him with those ancient knowing eyes. "That depends on you." "On me. You are white. You speak their language, understand their ways. If anyone can convince them that we mean no harm, it's you." Eli felt the weight of what was being asked settle onto his shoulders. Walk into a military patrol and try to talk them down. Risk being shot as a traitor or a hostage. Put everything on the line for people he'd known less than 2 weeks. He looked at Winona, at her grandmother, at the children peeking out from behind teepee flaps, too young to understand why the adults were so afraid. "I'll do it," he said. "Eli, no." Winona's grip on his hand tightened. "You can't. If they think you've turned traitor, then they'll shoot me. But if I don't try, they'll shoot everyone." He pulled her close, pressing his forehead against hers. "This is what I'm here for. This is why I survived. You survived because I dragged you into this village. And now it's my turn to protect it." He kissed her, brief but fierce. "I'll come back. I promise." "You can't promise that." "I'm promising anyway." He turned to Mapia. "Keep your warriors out of sight. No weapons visible, nothing that looks threatening. I'll try to buy you time." "And if you fail?" Eli thought about the rifle he'd held under his chin just a week ago. The piece he'd expected to find in death. The scream that had changed everything. "Then I'll have died for something that mattered," he said. "That's more than I expected when I woke up that morning." He walked out of the village alone, heading toward the sound of approaching hooves. The soldiers appeared over the ridge like a storm blue uniforms, gleaming rifles, the dark bulk of the cannon being pulled behind them. Captain Thomas Mercer rode at the front, his face set in hard lines that Eli recognized from his years in Boston. This was a man who had come to fight. "That's far enough," Mercer called out when Eli was 50 yards from the column. "Identify yourself." "Elijah Hawkins." Eli kept his hands visible, his voice steady. "Former schoolteacher from Boston, current resident of the Colorado Territory." "What's a schoolteacher doing in a Lakota village?" "Being healed. I was shot by some drunk hunters, and the people here saved my life." Eli took a slow step forward. "Captain, I know why you're here. And I'm telling you, you've been misinformed." Mercer's eyes narrowed. "We have reliable intelligence that this village was planning to raid a supply wagon. That's an act of war." "The raid was planned, yes, but it never happened. The warriors stood down." "Why should I believe that?" "Because I'm standing here telling you." Another step forward. Captain, I was there. I watched them turn around and go home. There was no attack. No soldiers died. This village isn't preparing for war. They're preparing for winter. Mercer studied him for a long moment. Behind him, the soldiers shifted restlessly, their rifles ready. Even if what you're saying is true, the captain said slowly, it doesn't change the fact that they planned an attack. That kind of aggression can't go unanswered. What aggression? Thinking about something isn't a crime. If it was, half the people in Boston would be in prison. Eli forced himself to keep his voice calm. These people have done nothing wrong. They're trying to survive same as everyone else. They're savages who murdered good soldiers. They're human beings who watched their land get stolen and their families get killed. Eli's voice rose despite himself. They're not saints, but neither are we. And if you ride into that village with your cannon and your rifles, you won't be stopping a war. You'll be starting one. The silence that followed was deafening. Eli could feel 30 rifles trained on him, 30 fingers on 30 triggers. You seem awfully attached to these people, Mercer said finally. Why is that? Because they showed me kindness when they had every reason not to. Because they healed me when they could have let me die. Eli thought of Winona's kiss, of Mapia's wisdom, of the children hiding in the teepees. Because I've spent the last week watching them live their lives, and they're not so different from us. They love their families, they mourn their dead, they hope for something better. Pretty words, but they won't bring back the soldiers they've killed. No, nothing will bring back the dead, theirs or ours. Eli's voice broke slightly. Believe me, Captain, I know something about loss. I know what it's like to want revenge, to want to hurt someone because hurting them might make the pain stop. But it doesn't work. It never works. So what do you suggest? We just ride away. Pretend nothing happened. I suggest you talk to their chief, man to man, face to face. Hear what he has to say before you decide to kill everyone in that village. Mercer was silent for a long moment. Behind him, one of the soldiers muttered something about wasting time, but the captain raised a hand for silence. You're asking me to trust savages who've been killing settlers for years. I'm asking you to be better than they expect you to be. Eli met his eyes. I'm asking you to prove that we're not the monsters they think we are. The words hung in the air between them. Eli could see the conflict on Mercer's face, duty warring with something that might have been conscience. If this is a trap, the captain said finally, I'll kill you first. It's not a trap, but if it makes you feel better, go ahead. Mercer almost smiled. You've got guts, schoolteacher. I'll give you that. He turned to his men. Stand down. We're going to talk. The ride into the village was the longest of Eli's life. He walked beside Mercer's horse, acutely aware of the rifles still trained on his back. The soldiers spread out as they entered, their eyes scanning every teepee, every shadow. This wasn't trust, it was armed caution. Mapia waited for them at the center of the village, flanked by Red Hawk and several other warriors. None of them were armed, but tension radiated from every line of their bodies. Chief Mapia, Mercer said, dismounting. I understand you've got something to say to me. Captain, Mapia's voice was formal, careful. I thank you for coming to speak rather than to fight. Thank your friend here. Mercer nodded toward Eli. He's either very brave or very stupid. Perhaps both. A ghost of a smile crossed the chief's face. But he speaks the truth. My people do not want war. We want only to live in peace. Your warriors plan to attack a supply wagon. Some of them did, yes. Mapia met Mercer's gaze without flinching. They were angry, and grief can make men foolish. But they were stopped by this man, and by my granddaughter, and by the wisdom that still lives in their hearts. And what's to stop them from trying again? What's to stop your soldiers from riding through our village with cannons? Mapia's voice hardened slightly. Trust has to start somewhere, Captain. Someone has to be the first to put down their weapon. Mercer was quiet for a long moment. Eli watched him, trying to read the thoughts behind those hard eyes. "What do you want?" the captain asked finally. "I want my people to survive the winter. I want our children to grow up knowing their own language, their own stories." Mapia paused. "I want peace. Real peace, not the kind that comes from one side surrendering to the other." "The government wants you on the reservation." "The government wants many things. That doesn't make them right." Mapia stepped closer to Mercer, and the soldiers tensed. "I have lived many winters, Captain. I have seen treaties made and broken promises given and forgotten. But I have also seen moments, small moments, when understanding became possible." "What kind of moments?" "Moments like this one." Mapia gestured to Eli. "A week ago this man was a stranger. My people had every reason to kill him. Instead they healed him. And today he stood between my village and your guns. That is what peace looks like, not words on paper, but people choosing to see each other as human beings." The silence stretched between them. Eli could feel the entire village holding its breath. Then slowly Mercer removed his hat. "I'm not authorized to make treaties," he said. "I'm just a captain. But I can tell you this, I came here expecting to find enemies. Instead, I found a village full of families trying to survive." He looked around at the watching faces, the women, the children, the warriors who had set aside their weapons. "I won't attack people who aren't fighting back. That's not what I signed up for. And the cannon will stay where it is." Mercer met Mapia's eyes. "I can't promise what the generals will decide, but I can promise that today no one dies. Is that enough?" Mapia extended his hand, a white man's gesture learned from years of difficult negotiations. "Today is enough," he said. "Tomorrow we will see." Mercer shook his hand. And just like that, the immediate danger was over. The soldiers withdrew an hour later, their cannons silent, their rifles unfired. Mercer promised to report what he'd seen: a peaceful village, a misunderstanding resolved, though they all knew his superiors might not listen. "You bought us time," Mapia told Eli as they watched the soldiers disappear over the ridge. "That's all anyone can do." "Is it enough?" "It has to be." The chief put a hand on Eli's shoulder. "You did well today. Running Bear would have been proud." Eli didn't know what to say to that. He stood in silence as Mapia walked away, leaving him alone with his thoughts. "You scared me." He turned to find Winona behind him, her arms crossed, her expression caught between anger and relief. "I know. You walked into 30 rifles, without a weapon, without a plan." "I had a plan." "Talking isn't a plan." She stepped closer, her eyes bright. "Talking is what you do when you don't have a plan and you're too stubborn to run." "It worked, didn't it?" She stared at him for a long moment. Then she grabbed the front of his shirt and pulled him into a kiss that was equal parts fury and relief. "Don't ever do that again," she said when they finally broke apart. "I can't promise that." "I know." She pressed her forehead against his. "I know." They stood there together as the sun climbed higher, two broken people who had somehow found their way back to each other. The future was uncertain. The army might return. Red Hawk's anger might resurface. 1,000 things could still go wrong. But for this moment, they were alive. They were together. And that was enough. 3 weeks passed and winter came to the Colorado Territory with a vengeance. The first snow fell on a morning so cold that Eli's breath froze in his beard before it could dissipate. He stood outside Winona's family teepee, watching the flakes drift down from a sky the color of iron, and thought about how much had changed since that day in the field with the rifle under his chin. His wound had healed, leaving a scar that would never fully fade. But it was a clean scar, the kind that reminded you of survival, not suffering. He touched it, sometimes feeling the raised tissue through his shirt, and marveled at the path that had brought him here. "You're thinking too hard again." Winona appeared beside him, wrapped in a buffalo robe, her breath making small clouds in the frozen air. She had developed an uncanny ability to read his moods, to know when his thoughts were drifting toward dark places. "Just remembering," he said. "Remembering what? The day I met you. How angry I was at myself for surviving." He turned to face her. "And how grateful I am now that I did." She smiled that rare, genuine smile that transformed her face and made his heart stumble. "I'm grateful too, though I still think you're too stubborn for your own good. You married me anyway." "I did." She reached up and touched his face, her fingers cold against his cheek. "Though technically, you married me. Twice." The memory made Eli smile. 2 weeks ago, they had stood before Mapia and the entire village exchanging vows in the Lakota tradition. Winona had been radiant in her ceremonial dress, and Eli had fumbled through the unfamiliar words with a sincerity that made the watching elders nod with approval. The next day, they had ridden to Miller's Creek and found a traveling preacher willing to perform a Christian ceremony. Sam Whitfield had stood as witness, tears streaming down his weathered face, while his wife Martha held Winona's hand and whispered translations of the English prayers. 2 ceremonies, 2 cultures, 1 marriage. "Any regrets?" Eli asked the question he'd been afraid to voice for weeks. "About marrying you." Winona pretended to consider it. "Well, you snore, and you talk in your sleep, and you still can't cook anything more complicated than burned coffee. Those aren't regrets. Those are complaints. Same thing, isn't it?" But she was smiling as she said it, and when she leaned up to kiss him, her lips were warm despite the cold. The village had changed around them. After Captain Mercer's visit, a fragile peace had settled over the territory. The soldiers still patrolled, and the pressure to move to the reservation hadn't disappeared. But the immediate threat of violence had receded, giving everyone room to breathe. Red Hawk had changed too. The hatred that had burned in his eyes was still there. Eli doubted it would ever fully disappear, but it had been tempered by something else. Respect, maybe. Or at least acknowledgement that the world was more complicated than he'd wanted to believe. They weren't friends. They might never be friends. But they had reached an understanding, and for now, that was enough. "My grandfather wants to see us," Winona said, breaking into his thoughts. "He said it was important." "Did he say what about?" "No, but he had that look. The one he gets when he's about to ask us to do something difficult." Eli sighed. "Of course he does." Mapia was waiting for them in the council teepee, seated beside a fire that did little to chase away the winter chill. His face was grave-lined with concerns that seemed to have multiplied in recent weeks. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the furs across from him. "We have much to discuss." They sat Winona's hand, finding Eli's automatically. Whatever was coming, they would face it together. "A messenger arrived this morning," Mapia began. "From Fort Morrison. Captain Mercer has been reassigned to another territory. His replacement," the chief paused, choosing his words carefully, "is not a man of peace." Eli felt Winona tense beside him. "What does that mean for the village?" "It means that the time we bought is running out. The new commander has made it clear that he intends to enforce the government's order. All tribes must move to the reservation by spring or face the consequences." "What consequences?" "The same consequences that have befallen every tribe that refused to submit." Mapia's voice was heavy with the weight of history. "Soldiers, cannons, death." The fire crackled in the silence that followed. Eli thought about the children playing outside, about the elders who had spent their entire lives on this land, about everything that would be lost if the army followed through on its threats. "There has to be another way," he said. "There may be." Mapia leaned forward, his ancient eyes fixed on Eli's face. "The new commander's name is Colonel Harrison. He served with your father." The words hit Eli like a physical blow. "My father. Before he died, your father was a respected officer in the Union Army. He fought with honor in the war between your states. And according to the messenger, Colonel Harrison remembers him well." Eli's mind reeled. He had spent so many years running from his family's legacy, the military tradition that had claimed his father, the expectations that had driven him to teaching instead of soldiering. He had never imagined that legacy might save him. "What are you asking me to do?" "I'm asking you to speak with him, man to man, as you did with Captain Mercer." Mapia's voice softened slightly. "But this time, you will not be a stranger pleading for mercy. You will be the son of a man the colonel respected. That may make all the difference. And if it doesn't, then we will have tried everything, and whatever comes next, we will face it with clear consciences." Eli looked at Winona. Her face was pale but determined, her hand tight around his. "I'll go with you," she said. "No, it's too dangerous." "More dangerous than walking alone into 30 rifles." Her voice carried an edge of steel. "You don't get to protect me from everything, Eli. We're partners now. Whatever happens, we face it together." He wanted to argue. Every instinct screamed at him to keep her safe, to shield her from whatever waited at Fort Morrison. But he knew that look in her eyes, the same stubborn determination that had made her drag him into the village that first day, bleeding and barely conscious. "Together," he agreed. "Then go," Mapia said. "Go and speak for our people. And may the spirits guide your words." They left the next morning, riding through snow that reached their horses' knees. The journey to Fort Morrison took 2 days, and they spent the nights huddled together for warmth, talking about everything and nothing. Winona told him stories from her childhood hunting trips with her father, festivals where the entire tribe came together to celebrate the changing seasons. Eli shared memories of Boston, the cobblestone streets, the smell of the harbor, the way Rebecca's eyes had looked in candlelight. It was the first time they had spoken freely about their pasts without the shadow of grief making every word feel like a wound. "Do you miss it?" Winona asked on the second night. "Your old life." Eli considered the question. "I miss parts of it. I miss being part of a community. I miss having a purpose." He pulled her closer against the cold. "But I don't miss who I was. That man was broken in ways he didn't even understand. And now I'm still broken. But I'm healing." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "Because of you. Because of your people. Because I finally found something worth living for." She was quiet for a long moment. Running Bear used to say that the worst wounds aren't the ones you can see. The worst wounds are the ones you carry inside, the grief, the anger, the guilt. He said the only way to heal them was to let someone else see them. He was wise. He was. I just wish I had listened to him better when he was alive. Her voice caught slightly. "I spent so much time trying to be strong, trying to prove that I didn't need anyone. And then he was gone. And I realized that strength isn't about not needing people. It's about being brave enough to let them in. You let me in." "I did." She looked up at him, her dark eyes shining in the firelight. "And it was the hardest thing I've ever done, but also the best." Eli thought about the rifle under his chin, the peace he'd expected to find in death. He thought about Winona's scream cutting through the wind, the choice his body had made before his mind could catch up. "We saved each other," he said. "Yes," she smiled. "I suppose we did." Fort Morrison appeared on the horizon late the next afternoon, a collection of wooden buildings surrounded by a high wooden wall, the American flag snapping in the bitter wind. Eli felt his stomach clench as they approached. This was the world he had left behind, the world of uniforms and orders, and men who saw the land in terms of territory to be conquered. He had never felt comfortable in that world, even before Rebecca and Emma died. Now, with Winona beside him, he felt like an intruder. "Remember," she said quietly as they approached the gate, "you're the son of a hero. That means something to these people." "It doesn't mean anything to me." "It doesn't have to. It just has to mean something to Colonel Harrison." The guards at the gate eyed them with suspicion. A white man in native clothing, a Lakota woman in trader's garb. But when Eli gave his name, and asked to see the colonel, something shifted in their expressions. "Hawkins," one of them repeated. "Like Captain James Hawkins. My father." The guard exchanged glances with his companion. "Wait here." They waited in the cold for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Eli could feel eyes on them from every direction, soldiers pausing in their duties to stare, whispered conversations cutting off as they passed. He had forgotten how much he hated being watched. "Mr. Hawkins." A young lieutenant approached, his face carefully neutral. "Colonel Harrison will see you now, but the woman will have to wait here. She comes with me, or I don't come at all." The lieutenant's eyes widened slightly. "Sir, the colonel's orders." "Then the colonel can change his orders. Or he can explain to his superiors why he refused to meet with the son of James Hawkins." For a moment, Eli thought the lieutenant would refuse, but then the young man's shoulders slumped slightly. "Wait here, I'll ask." He disappeared into one of the larger buildings, and Eli let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "That was risky," Winona murmured. "Everything about this is risky. Might as well be risky on our terms." The lieutenant returned a few minutes later, his expression sour. "The colonel will see you both. Follow me." Colonel Harrison's office was surprisingly small, just a desk, a few chairs, and a wall covered with maps of the territory. The man himself was older than Eli had expected, with iron-gray hair and eyes that had seen too many battles to be surprised by much of anything. "Elijah Hawkins," the colonel said, studying him across the desk. "You look like your father." "I've been told that." "He was a good man, one of the best officers I ever served with." Harrison's gaze shifted to Winona, and something flickered in his eyes, curiosity maybe, or calculation. "And this is my wife, Winona." The colonel's eyebrows rose. "I see. She's the granddaughter of Chief Mapia, the man your predecessor made peace with." "Peace." Harrison leaned back in his chair. "Captain Mercer called it that. I call it weakness. You call trying to prevent bloodshed weakness? I call letting hostiles dictate terms weakness." The colonel's voice hardened. "I have my orders, Mr. Hawkins. Every tribe in this territory is to be moved to the reservation by spring. Those who refuse will be dealt with." "Dealt with?" Eli felt anger rising in his chest. "You mean murdered." "I mean subdued, by whatever means necessary." Harrison's eyes never left his face. "Your father understood that. He understood that sometimes hard choices have to be made for the greater good." "My father fought in a war to free slaves. He didn't slaughter women and children because the government found their presence inconvenient." The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. Eli could feel Winona tense beside him, ready to move if things went wrong. "You have courage," Harrison said finally. "I'll give you that. But courage won't change my orders." "What will—" The colonel studied him for a long moment. "Why do you care so much you're white? You could walk away from this. Go back to whatever life you had before. Why throw it all away for a bunch of savages?" Eli thought about all the answers he could give, the political arguments, the moral imperatives, the practical considerations. But in the end, there was only one truth that mattered. "Because they're my family now," he said simply. "Because my wife's grandmother saved my life when she didn't have to. Because her grandfather showed me kindness when every instinct told him to be suspicious. Because these people took in a broken, dying stranger and gave him a reason to live." He leaned forward. "I'm not asking you to change your orders, Colonel. I'm asking you to remember what my father fought for. He fought for the idea that every person deserves dignity. That power doesn't give you the right to destroy what you don't understand." Harrison was quiet for a long time. Outside, Eli could hear the sounds of the fort soldiers drilling horses, neighing, the wind rattling against the walls. "Your father used to talk about you," the colonel said finally. "He said you were too soft for soldiering, too idealistic." He was probably right. Maybe. Harrison stood and walked to the window, his back to them. There's a delegation coming from Washington next month. Senators who want to see the situation firsthand before authorizing more troops. What does that have to do with us? If they see a peaceful village, families living their lives without threatening anyone, they might decide that forced relocation isn't worth the political cost. The colonel turned to face them. I can't promise anything, but I can delay my plans until after the delegation arrives. Give you time to prove that your people aren't a threat. Eli's heart jumped. You'd do that? I'd do it for your father. He saved my life once during the war. I never had a chance to repay that debt. Harrison's expression softened slightly. Consider this my attempt. Thank you, Colonel. Don't thank me yet. If the delegation decides that force is necessary, there's nothing I can do. My superiors will have their war one way or another. Then we'll make sure they don't decide that. Harrison nodded slowly. You have until the spring thaw. Make it count. The ride back to the village felt shorter than the journey out. Maybe it was the hope warming his chest, or the way Winona pressed against him as they rode, or the knowledge that they had bought precious time for the people who had become his family. Whatever the reason, Eli found himself smiling as they crested the final hill and saw the teepees spread out below them. We did it, Winona said softly. We did. Now comes the hard part. What's the hard part? Convincing a bunch of senators that your people deserve to live in peace. Eli dismounted and helped her down. Any idea how to do that? Show them who we are. Not the stories they've heard, not the fears they've been taught. Show them real people living real lives. And if that's not enough, then at least we'll have tried. She took his hand. That's all any of us can do? Mapia met them at the edge of the village, his face anxious until he saw their expressions. Then slowly a smile spread across his weathered features. You succeeded. We bought time, Eli said. A few months. There's a delegation coming from Washington senators who want to see the situation for themselves. And you believe they will see reason. I believe we have a chance, a real chance. The chief nodded slowly. Then we must make the most of it. He put a hand on Eli's shoulder. You have done well, son. Better than I dared hope. The word hit Eli like a thunderbolt. Son, not white man, or stranger, or even Hawkins. Son. Thank you. He managed his voice rough. Thank you. Mapia's eyes were bright with emotion. You came to us broken and dying. You stayed and became one of us. And now you fight for our survival as if we were your own blood. The chief's hand tightened on his shoulder. Running Bear would be proud to call you brother. Eli couldn't speak. 3 weeks ago, he had been a ghost, haunting an empty cabin, counting down the days until he found the courage to pull a trigger. Now he stood in the middle of a Lakota village surrounded by people who had become his family, called son by a chief who had every reason to hate him. I'll do everything I can, he promised. I know you will. Mapia released him and turned toward the village. Come, there is much to prepare and little time to prepare it. The weeks that followed were the hardest of Eli's life and the most fulfilling. He worked alongside the villagers, helping to prepare for the senator's visit. They cleaned, they organized, they practiced the answers they would give to hostile questions. Eli coached them on white customs and expectations, while Winona translated his instructions and offered her own insights. Red Hawk even joined the effort grudgingly at first, then with increasing commitment. He still looked at Eli with suspicion sometimes, but the active hostility had faded. I don't like this, he said one evening after a particularly long planning session. Performing for white men like trained dogs. I know, Eli agreed, but sometimes survival requires doing things we don't like. Is that wisdom or cowardice? Probably both. Eli met his eyes. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Sorry that your people have been pushed to this point. Sorry that you have to prove your humanity to men who should already recognize it. Red Hawk was quiet for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. "You are not what I expected," he said. "When Winona first brought you here, I thought you were just another white man, here to take what you wanted and leave destruction behind. I thought I was here to die. Instead you live, and you fight for us." Red Hawk's expression was unreadable. "Running Bear saw something in you that I couldn't see. Maybe I understand now what it was." "What was it?" "Honor. The real kind, not the kind that comes from words and promises. The kind that comes from actions." Red Hawk extended his hand, a white man's gesture learned from years of difficult dealings. "I will never call you friend, but I will call you brother." Eli took his hand. "That's more than I expected." "It's more than I expected, too." The senators arrived on a bright March morning, their carriages cutting through the last of the winter snow. Eli stood at the edge of the village with Winona and Mapia watching them approach. His heart was pounding. Everything they had worked for came down to this moment. "Remember," he murmured to Winona, "no matter what happens, I love you." "I know." She squeezed his hand. "I love you too." The delegation consisted of 3 men in expensive coats and polished boots. They looked out of place against the wild beauty of the territory, but their eyes were sharp and assessing. "Gentlemen," Eli said, stepping forward, "welcome. I'm Elijah Hawkins. I'll be your guide today." "Hawkins," the lead senator frowned, "as in Captain James Hawkins, my father. I served with him briefly during the war. Good man." The senator's expression softened slightly. "I hope his son has some of his integrity." "I try, sir." What followed was the most important performance of Eli's life. He led the senators through the village, showing them the teepees where families lived, the fires where meals were cooked, the children who played in the melting snow. He introduced them to Mapia, who spoke with quiet dignity about his people's hopes for peace. He translated Winona's stories about life on the plains, about traditions that stretched back generations, about the future they dreamed of building. And slowly, he watched the senators' expressions change. They had come expecting savages. Instead, they found people, real people with hopes and fears, loves and losses, dreams and disappointments. They found a community that wanted nothing more than to be left in peace. "This isn't what I expected," the lead senator admitted as they prepared to leave. "I was told these people were dangerous, that they couldn't be reasoned with." "They're people, sir. Some are dangerous just like some white men are dangerous, but most of them just want to live their lives without being afraid." The senator studied him for a long moment. "You've chosen an unusual path, Mr. Hawkins, living among them, marrying one of them. Most men in your position would have walked away. Most men in my position never had a chance to know them." Eli looked back at the village at Winona, standing with her grandmother at Mapia, speaking quietly with his warriors at Red Hawk, teaching a group of children how to track game. "I was dying when I came here. They gave me a reason to live. How could I walk away from that?" The senator nodded slowly. "I can't promise anything, Mr. Hawkins, but I can tell you this. I will recommend that these people be allowed to stay on their land, at least for now. That's all we ask, sir. A chance. Then you shall have it." The news came 2 months later, carried by a rider from Fort Morrison. The senators had made their recommendation, and Washington had agreed. Mapia's village would be allowed to remain on their land, provided they maintained peace with the surrounding settlements. It wasn't a permanent solution. Eli knew that the pressure would return, that future generations would face new challenges. But it was a start. It was hope. That night, the entire village celebrated. There was singing and dancing and food and joy, the pure, unrestrained joy of people who had been granted a future they hadn't dared to imagine. Eli stood at the edge of the celebration watching Winona dance with the other women, her face radiant with happiness. Her grandmother sat nearby, clapping along with the music, while Mapia looked on with the satisfaction of a man who had secured his people's survival. Even Red Hawk was smiling, though he tried to hide it. "You look happy." Eli turned to find Sam Whitfield approaching, his weathered face split in a grin. The old trader had ridden from Miller's Creek to join the celebration, bringing Martha and a wagon load of supplies as a gift. "I am happy," Eli said. "Happier than I've been in years. Never thought I'd see you smile again after what happened in Boston." Sam clapped him on the shoulder. "But I'm glad I was wrong." "So am I." Winona appeared beside them, slightly out of breath from dancing. "Are you going to stand here all night, or are you going to join us?" "I don't know how to dance." "Then I'll teach you." She grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the fire. "Come on, your wife is giving you an order." "Yes, ma'am," Eli said, and let her lead him into the light. Later, much later, they lay together in their tipi, listening to the sounds of celebration slowly fade into peaceful silence. "Are you still scared?" Winona asked, her head resting on his chest. "Of what?" "Of losing this. Of something going wrong. Of waking up one day and finding out it was all a dream." Eli considered the question. A year ago, even a few months ago, he would have said yes. He would have been waiting for the other shoe to drop, for happiness to be snatched away like it always had been. But something had changed. "No," he said. "I'm not scared anymore." "Why not?" "Because I've already lost everything once. And I survived. I found my way back to living, found people worth loving, found a reason to face each morning." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "Whatever comes next, I know I can handle it, because I won't be facing it alone." Winona lifted her head to look at him, her dark eyes soft in the firelight. "I love you, Elijah Hawkins." "I love you too, Winona." He pulled her close. "My wife, my partner, my reason for living." Outside, the first birds of spring began to sing, heralding the dawn of a new season, a new beginning. A year ago, Eli had stood in a field with a rifle under his chin, ready to end everything. Then a woman had screamed, and everything had changed. He had been looking for death. Instead, he had found life, messy, complicated, beautiful life. He had found love in the most unexpected place. He had found family among people his culture had taught him to fear. He had found purpose in fighting for something greater than himself. And most importantly, he had found the courage to keep going, to wake up each morning and choose hope over despair, connection over isolation, life over death. The journey wasn't over. There would be more challenges ahead, more battles to fight, more losses to endure. But Eli knew now that he could face them. Because he wasn't the broken man who had ridden into these hills 3 years ago. He was something new, something stronger, something whole. And as the sun rose over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold, and rose, Eli Hawkins held his wife close and smiled. He had finally come home,